wanted to talk to you today about identity. The thing that I realised is the central the driving force behind my novels, especially The Land of Decoration. I realised after I'd written that everything comes back to identity, and the part of a human being that I believe causes the most pain. When we identify with something, we fuse with it and take its characteristics into ourselves. And then when that aspect is attacked, we feel attacked. The happiest people I've ever met have not really had a very strong sense of identity. And just looking at myself, I can see that I have a very strong, I have a very strong sense of identity and also no sense of identity at all. I continually felt threatened by things, and as if my identity was being attacked. And I would rather physical pain, not agonizing physical pain, but significant physical pain. About 10 years ago, when I was in quite a bad place with ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome, someone recommended a book to me called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and that began a good few years of reading so-called spiritual teachers or mystical writers, and now I have quite a collection. I'll list all the titles that I've read and I've found helpful beneath this video, but a common theme in these books is that identity is the source of human psychological pain. We identify with things very, very early on in life. Children and babies very soon cultivate a sense of ownership towards certain things. And our relationships with people also form our sense of identity. Possibly the most fundamental part of that. But sometimes in lieu of sufficiently nourishing relationships with people, we turn to inanimate things or work in order to shore up a sense of identity and give us a concrete sense of ourselves. That was what I did, and I was also kind of torn because I was raised in a religion which, as I grew older, I became more and more disillusioned with, and all the kind of innate bits of my being were pulling me in one direction. For instance, I loved music and drama, but a lot of those activities were automatically curtailed. It wasn't even worth thinking about them really, because they contradicted a lot of principles in the religion. I also feel I was a very sexual being, but that's never come to fruition or been able to develop in a natural way, at least, again because of the way I was brought up. I also feel at my heart I'm a very sort of free person. I hate being bound by things or constrained, but of course in the religion God always came first, and because God is infallible, you can never really argue about that, or it's not even worth thinking about that. So even after I left the religion, I felt very guilty for a few years that I wasn't still in it, and I felt despair and hopelessness. And it was only when it began to dawn on me that yes, I didn't feel it was the truth. I found some relief. But in the meantime, I created an identity for myself by means of work, and that was so destructive because it effectively eroded, first of all, my mind, and then my physical body. My physical body broke down because I drove myself so hard. And it gave little rewards every now and then. For instance, typically results time at exams. I think I might just bring the camera forward a tiny bit. Typically results time with exams. I remember the euphoria when I came third highest or something in Oxford in moderations, which are the exams at the end of the first year, the third highest mark, and it seemed unbelievable. I remember the euphoria. I remember my mum and I running around the garden. But it didn't last very long. As soon as I got back, another guy in my tutorial group, I learned he'd come first in the university. So, and similar kinds of things happen all the time. For instance, when the novels were published, I would be buoyed one minute by a lovely review and then utterly kind of hollowed out and destroyed by a scathing one. So my work is kind of it's just a thing that keeps you preoccupied, really. It's a tiny bit of pleasure every now and then, mostly just attrition, erosion, and quite a bit of torture. My appearance was another thing that I cared and still care, unfortunately, massively about. And I realised kind of in my mid-20s that actually, since puberty, I'd had something called dysmorphia, which is an intense dislike of a bit of your body. Well, in this case, it was my face, because, well, I won't go into the details, but it was sufficient that I hid my face for many years with scarves, hair, hats, whatever I could. And I was saving up for plastic surgery. It never happened because I got ill, but my face, that I can't describe the feelings I have towards it, but I used to often feel suicidal about this, and so that was a form of identification, which was another form of torture. Then my work, my face, yes, my lack of relationships with men, because my life took a bit of an unusual turn, and who knows, maybe if my life hadn't taken an unusual turn, I would still, through my own idiosyncrasies and weird work habits and face, I can't rule that out as a reason. Maybe I still would never have had a relationship, but my life events certainly put pay to that, and so that was the most painful identity of all. That was the worst form of torture of all. The fact I never had a relationship, and I couldn't really give myself to anything else actually except writing novels, because the depression was so severe. But since reading The Spiritual Teachers, I'm just checking if we're filming. Oh yeah. But since reading The Spiritual Teachers, which I've read on and off now for 10 years, I realised that, at least in theory, although I have no experience to the contrary to verify this, all the things humans normally identify with are actually illusory. Well, of course, a lot of you might be aware of this anyway. But I was thinking recently, if something changes continually, can it be said to exist in and of itself? It's a bit like the Argonaut, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, the situation whereby the Argonauts repaired the Argo during the journey in the old Greek myth, and repaired it to such an extent that not one single bit of the old ship remained. So could it still be called the Argo? I guess the DNA, the plan was the same. But if we apply the analogy to ourselves, what bit of ourselves doesn't change, or isn't formed, which is the same as change? For instance, our character, we might think that's us, but it changes through life. People often say they mellow as they get older. Dave has just come in. So, as I was saying, everything changes. Our body changes through our life. Our mind changes. I think the physical body itself is completely reconstituted every 7 years, is that right? Our character changes to an extent, and our character itself is only a product of various things, a product of upbringing, product of genes, DNA, product of the way our parents raised us, a product of the experiences we've had. So can that really be said to be us? What remains? Everything can be taken away and everything changes. That we can point to say this is me. Even our memories change. Our past sense of ourselves. I think what I would like to try and do before I die is to not find out, because the minute you set yourself up to find out something like that, you're bound to, well, it's lunacy and hubris, but I would like to at least try and do without or strip away the things that typically constitute an identity. Even if the identity is very painful, when parts of that are stripped away, it can be agonizing mentally and emotionally. I'm thinking of when I lost the use of my legs and I was pretty sure I would be shortly diagnosed with MS. The grief and the sense of loss I experienced thinking of what I would lose, even though I was itself very unhappy before the symptoms ever arrived, so it wasn't a happy existence. But then suddenly the thought of it being stripped away was unbearable. So I have a feeling, judged on what's happened to me so far, that I have to go further into losing parts of myself. At various points throughout my life there have been sort of destructions. First my mind. First during the breakdown my mind was severely attacked. It wasn't destroyed, I didn't go mad. I wish I could have gone mad, but it was under attack. And then my body, and once you've gone up to a certain point, once you've experienced the disintegration of either one, body or mind, to a certain degree, I don't know, I think there's I just have a feeling that it will happen again. And there is a part of me that wants it to, in the sense that I feel, why not continue along that path and kind of finish it properly, if you know what I mean? Why not sort of? The spiritual teachers, and I think this is one of the downsides of reading too many spiritual or mystical texts, say that the only part of ourselves that is truly ourselves is paradoxically a part, or the totality of ourselves that constitutes everything else as well. So they say consciousness is the only thing that is truly ourselves, but that is also shared with everything else you can think of, from stars to stones to people to animals. Even inanimate objects are apparently conscious, and apparently the realization of that, not just the theoretical understanding which I have, but the felt realization of that, is immeasurably liberating, relieving, and imbues that personal consciousness, or that share of universal consciousness, with absolute peace. Not happiness, they say, but peace. And then of course the danger is that people like myself, who suffered to a certain extent and had their identity destroyed in various ways, think, I'm so far along that path, I would like to go a bit further and try and gain that peace. But of course that's just the false identity, the ego, or the mind created self, wanting to attain another thing, possess another thing, this time being peace. And so we can't choose to discover this. We can't do anything in order to get there. and at the same time we can do everything. There are two sort of schools of thought. One in which action is very much encouraged, and the other in which action is seen as utterly futile. So in any case, I just have a hunch that the dissolution is not quite over yet. And the sense of identity I have anyway is always just sort of patching it up. And everyone is really doing that. I think there's a kind of desperation beneath everyone. Nearly everyone. And perhaps some people aren't even aware of it because it's all they know, but nothing is ever quite enough, is it? We always are trying to soothe or placate or patch up our sense of ourselves, augment, even elucidate, because sometimes even a painful self, I think we would cling on to a painful self rather than just let go of it, even if our mind was torturing us, because at least we know where we stand. I remember in my kind of darkest hours, what I was mainly trying to do was clarify. I was frantically trying to get to a space where I could sum things up, to the point where I used to try and find the optimum sentence to describe what was happening, what I was feeling. I would also try and put time limits on it, like I'd sort of write down, I only have to do this for another year or another 2 years or something like that, or in 6 months I'll know ... And that brings me to the second thing I wanted to say, which is, according to the spiritual teachers, time and identity are interlinked. They're completely fused in the human mind. And if we remove time from identity, then the pain ceases. The identity, the mind-made self, can only exist in relation to time. Which I think is absolutely right, and I've experienced that during the breakdown, during being physically ill. The torture actually was the sense of time, the sense of what I lost in the past, the sense of dread about what the future would bring, and very rarely did I occupy the present moment. And so, even though consciously I would say, yes, I want to shed myself completely, I want to step out of it, shuffle it off like a snake discards its old skin, sorry. I know that there's a vastly more powerful part of myself than the conscious part, which will hang on to that, like a drowning man will struggle to the ear, and like a falling person will, well, a man will cling onto the edge of a cliff. I know because during the breakdown I said to myself, I said to myself, if only you could let go of yourself, then there would be peace in that. There'd be kind of a death as well, but there'd be peace, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't consciously do it. And this brings me to the main kind of, not bugbear, but rub I have with spiritual teachings, and that is that I don't believe enlightenment or the peace that comes, even the semi-peace that comes with realizing we're part of a whole, is volitional, and I don't believe it can come through action. So I think it is involuntary 99% of the time, which kind of leaves us helpless, because what can we do to attain it? And most people aren't interested in attaining it, because they're, busy with their lives, leading happy or at least very absorbing lives. And then, the last thing I wanted to say is that I've never really had an identity. You might think, yes, she does, quite a sort of idiosyncratic perhaps even eccentric, perhaps, I don't know, identity. I mean, you know, I've got this sort of aesthetic, this sort of style going on. I've got the sort of quiet voice, demeanour. Mind you, there's only one bit of me. Maybe one day I'll film one of my rages on camera. But I've never really had a sense of self, and that's why I'm buffeted by everything. You know, the closest thing I could say to having a sense of self is that I really know what I like and don't like in an aesthetic sense. So with regards to literature, for instance, I know very, very soon, reading a book, whether it's for me or not, and I can't always even defend that. And I have a very, the same with people. Sometimes actually I jump to conclusions with people, and that's because I think hurtful experiences from my past kind of colour my vision a little bit, and I become defensive or something. I guess people who know me would say, yes, I have a definite identity, but really I feel there are at least half a dozen other me's in the wings that have never had a chance to come on stage. I can be kind of childlike, extremely childlike, extremely sexual. I can be extremely extroverted and introverted. I can go through periods of intense work and activity and periods of intense lethargy. So I can be really, really whimsical and kind of giddy and dizzy and kind of irritatingly twee and silly and gay and light, you know, just buoyant. And then I can be beyond black, just kind of sludge, sea bottom, excrement, abyss type stuff. So I really have never felt I had a stable identity. And although that caused a lot of pain because my identity was really vulnerable, I think it's also enabled me at least to be aware of the fact that most of the time, no, all of the time, what we identify with is not really us. And what is really us, what may really constitute us, that is what, before I die, I would like to at least get a glimpse of. I think that is more important than doing anything in the external world, because I have a feeling that knowledge, felt experiential knowledge of this innate self is vastly more valuable than anything we do. And that's all I wanted to say in this video. Thank you for watching.